Hi, it's Neva at timeforinvesting.com, and today I'm continuing my segment on going over a couple of transactions that I worked on, answering these 4 questions. How did I get the lead or find the property? How was I able to help the property owner or to motivate them to sell? Or how did I find a cash buyer? And what was the crazy thing that happened? So this one was a property. How did I find the lead? This one is, I found the lead, I actually called. The property owner and asked him if he was interested in selling. I actually, at the time, I think I had called probably like a couple hundred and finally I found somebody that said yes. So calling is a good technique, but you have to be willing to call a lot. I would say I've definitely called at least like 1,000 people so far, so I call a lot. So I haven't called in a long time, but when I was calling, like, it's a lot before you're gonna get somebody that says yes. So that's a way, like a marketing method as well. 2, so what was the motivation for the property owner to sell? So in this situation, the property was tenant occupied, and his requirement was that we close on the house with the tenant in the house. The issues there was that the tenant's rent was like, you know, the average rent probably in that neighborhood was maybe like $3,000. And if I can remember, I think she was paying like $600. It was like something like really, really crazy because it was like a family member. But then, you know, you get kind of stuck because then you can't like evict the family member. So she had been there like forever, and he was just kind of like, you guys buy it and you get her out type of thing. So you'll find though that when the rent is that low, that even still the cash buyers are going to be kind of hesitant sometimes to close with the tenant in there, because then they're going to also have to fight to get this tenant out as well, because they can't, you know, you can't really buy the property and then raise the rent from $600 to $3,000 and really think that this person's going to be able to pay it. So you kind of know, you know, whoever buys it kind of knows they're buying this headache. So in this situation, what I did, I said, okay, we'll close with the tenant. And what I did, I negotiated for us to close with the tenant, and then we held back, the title company held back, I think it was like $5,000 or something like that. And what that does is they hold it until the tenant leaves. So it's kind of like, it helps the seller to also help us get the tenant out. And just in case we can't get this tenant out, then that money is used to, you know, actually start the whole court process and eviction process and things like that, so that the cash buyer doesn't have to use his own money to get the tenant out. So that's what I use in that situation to get around that issue that he's saying, hey, I definitely need you guys to close with her in the house. So this is a situation where that's definitely a good transaction for a cash buyer, because a traditional person is not going to want to buy the headache of going through all, you know, going through this knowing that you're buying a property and you're going to have to evict someone. So it's a great opportunity for us, but I think, you know, you just have to always be aware that you're always trying to kind of like problem solve things. So don't like just give up when things like this happen. So once I negotiated that, then I had a lot of cash buyers that were interested in buying the property. How did I find the cash buyer that did buy the property? Actually, by the time I got this house under contract, I had like a really large buyers list, but it just so happened the guy that purchased it, he's actually the first cash buyer that ever gave me his card, and I got his card at a RIA meeting. I was at a RIA meeting, and they used to let us put, like, well, they still do, you put these stickers on saying like if you're a wholesaler, if you're a rehabber. And so what they'll say is, well, if you're a wholesaler, then you should be making sure that you're networking with a rehabber, because the rehabber will be buying what you get under contract and you need to wholesale. So it kind of helps the right people to network with each other. And so he was the first person that, you know, I had like build myself up to go to. I think at the time I hadn't wholesale anything. I just had like the sticker and I was like trying to claim it and say, I'm a wholesaler, you know, I need a cash buyer. And he gave me his card. So it worked out because I probably wasn't able to actually get him a property. I'm sure like a year or two had passed, but you know, it was great that, you know, I still had him on my list and he bought the property. So that's how I found the cash buyer. And then my last question I always answer is what crazy happened. So what happened on this one was we got ready to close. We're ready to close, and this property was actually, it was owned, it was free and clear. But when we got ready to close, it was showing that there was like an outstanding loan from like 1980 something, and the owner was like, I don't remember ever taking out a loan. I don't, you know, he didn't have like the paper saying it was paid off or what was going on. And then the issue was because the loan was so old, excuse me, the original bank, had, because you know, that bank, the original bank and the bank that it was now was like, I think it was like 5-6 companies. Like it just had been sold. And like if you ever work for a company and they merged, then you know that when companies like merge, they don't really like merge their systems. They just like slap the new company name on and they keep the system separate. So that I'm like calling and calling and calling, trying to find which section of the bank now has access to those old accounts. So that was taking me like days. Like even at this point, this title company, you know, they sent someone because like, you know, the bank couldn't even find the loan to say if it was paid off or it was owned. They just literally were saying, we can't find, you know, every time we reach someone, they were like, oh, I don't have access to loans that old. So finally we were able to find one. We were able to find it. And it turned out that the loan was paid off, like the guy said, because he was saying I can't even remember taking out a loan, and it was like for a tiny amount, and it was paid off, but the bank never went back and released that lien when he paid it off. So that's why it was still there. So they released it, and then we were able to close. So that's what I'm saying. It's things like that where you have to, unless you're until you get to the closing table and everything is final, you have to like monitor and be prepared to jump in and solve some issue, because more than likely, like I said, something's gonna happen. Because at least for me, I remember when I first started, my mentor at the time, Tom Z, he was saying that something always happens. And I used to think, oh, if I just, you know, make sure I dot every I, cross every T. But even now, it's just out of my control that something just always happens. Somebody's calling me with just something crazy. So just be willing to jump in and work, because if I don't jump in and be the person calling and making sure somebody finds this loan and get the release, then we're not going to close. And you know, the whole entire thing is going to fall apart. And I don't want that for the seller, and I don't want that for myself. So that's my tip for this week. And I'll go over it just again. Those 4 questions. How did I find the lead I called? What were their motivating factors? And also, this house needs a lot of repairs. Besides also that the tenant was in there, it also needed a lot of repairs too. And then 3, how did I find a cash buyer? I found the cash buyer at a RIA meeting. And 4, what crazy happened, there was this old lien that we had to make sure was released on the property. So continue to send me your questions and any other thing that I could tell you that's helpful on my wholesale deals. Let me know those questions that you have. But these are some of the common questions that I've been getting that I thought if I answered and actually gave you examples, it would be more helpful. So I'll see you. Like I said, I'll try to do 2 videos a week. So I'll see you next video, and remember to subscribe. Bye bye.